Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nicole Parker, and I am the project coordinator for the Transaction Program with Equality Florida. I hope you had an amazing weekend, and I'm so excited to be here with you today to celebrate Transgender Day of Visibility. And how we're going to celebrate is pretty awesome. We're going to have a wonderful conversation about living outside the binary. I want to introduce our amazing panelists. We have Mars, Angel, Hywin, and Becca. Welcome, everybody. How are you? All right, so we are going to jump right on in. So this question is for everybody, so we can kind of just go one by one. We can start with Mars. So when did you know that you were non-binary?
So it's kind of been a weird multi-step process for me. Like, technically I could say, like, kind of started as a kid. Like, I was just kind of, as kids sometimes do, thinking about gender things, and it didn't make any sense to me, really. And then later on, like, I'm talking like in high school and stuff, talking to friends and realizing, even if they were like kind of like the big thinker type people like me as kids, they never really came to this idea that I did of like, oh yeah, gender, that really doesn't make sense. And that was the moment that I was like, okay. And then, I mean, I technically came out. I'm specifically agender, and I technically came out in high school, then came out like again in college with my preferred name, not my dead name, and my pronouns. Right. So it's, like I said, it's definitely been a whole process.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Hywin? Oop, I think you're on mute, love.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. I would have to say between like 17 and 18, but I think I like didn't know before that. Like, I just didn't have the words, but I was always, non-binary. I think that I met the first person that I have ever met that used like non-binary pronouns in college, and I was like, oh, that's cool. But I didn't really think anything of that. And then like several months later, I noticed that I had started referring to myself like in my head using they, them. And I was like, wait, there's no reason like why everybody else shouldn't. And Then at that point I was like, oh, this makes sense for me. But yeah, I also had to come out like as gender fluid, like several times. Like, I'm gender fluid specifically. So.
No, thank you for sharing. How about you, Becca?
Yeah, I think like I really resonate with like what y'all have been saying about process, because it took me a while. I remember being like 16 and walking around my high school and just having this like thought in my head, it being like, I am transgender, and like them being like, no, like kind of like being like pushing it down, or just like not knowing how to talk about it or what it meant. Like, just like this very strong thought, like, I am not a girl, like not like I am not a girl. And then I need to shout out like the slam poetry community here, because I did a program where all these poets were just like, is it okay if I use they, them pronouns for you? Like, is that okay? Because I kind of get the vibe. I'm catching a vibe here. And I was like, yeah, I'm okay with that. Like, I'm okay with whatever. And then I was like, no, like, that's the whole thing. Like, that's me. Like, that's how I want to be recognized socially. And it was really hard because I received a lot of pushback from my family. I remember like my aunt had this really long conversation with me, and she was like, and it was very confusing. I was only 17 or 18, and she was like, I'm there's nothing wrong with you being non-binary, but I just don't want it to be so hard for you. And I was like looking back now, I'm like, I don't know if I would have, if I were the adult in that situation, I would not have said that to my 17-year-old self. Right. So it was very confusing and kind of like threw me off my kilter. But the more I found community of people who were willing to see me and use my pronouns, like the more I felt affirmed in that comfort. So I could kind of like try on different things. So like essentially it's a long process. There were so many confusing messages I didn't have the vocabulary. I found it on like fucking, I don't know if I can curse. Okay, sorry. I found that on YouTube. I watched so many YouTube coming out videos in high school. Like, oh. So that was really big for me too. And it's just, I'm at a point, I don't think it's static. I wouldn't say I'm settled here, but I've reached some consistency over the past few years where I feel comfortable being non-binary, saying I'm non-binary, and being referred to with they, them pronouns. When like my parents still want to call me their daughter, which I understand is complicated. That's another can of worms. And I'm just kind of like, oh, okay. But I'll pause there for now. I really want to hear what Angel you had to say too.
No, thank you for sharing. How about you, Angel?
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Just listening to your stories, it's a little bit different from me because it sounds like I'm probably one of the older individuals on the panel. Without Nicole, you kind of know without giving my age away. I'm just saying. Growing up non-binary really was not a thing for my generation. It was, you know, trans, gay was the typical, the original LGBT, like that. That was all we had. So for me, I will say the journey has always been there, but I say probably around 2015. For those of you that don't know, I am assigned male at birth. I'm ABAB, so genetically speaking, I am a male. But I started out doing drag pageantry, and I was like, this is too glamorous for me. I'm not really, I didn't see it for me, like, because typically when people think girl, they think, heels, hair, lashes.
Right.
It was fun. So I was like, okay, I tried that. Didn't like it. So then I was like, okay, once again, let me try to do a boy pageant. So I did the same thing. It was like, still kind of in that field of, okay, this don't feel right to me either. So then, like I said, I met my first non-binary person. I want to say probably like the end of maybe 2018, beginning of 2019. And we just really sat down and they were telling me like, I'm non-binary. And I was just like, this sounds so much like me because the reason for me personally, I don't believe there's such thing as a binary. Like, I feel like life, just live life without limitations.
Mm-hmm.
But I say probably 2019 was probably around the time I started to like publicly be like, oh, I'm non-binary. And for me, I use Z pronouns because a lot of people keep telling me they, them, theirs not grammatically correct. It actually technically is. However, I don't feel the need to be your school teacher and get into that sentence structure. So Z is just really easy. A lot of people make it seem like a nickname. Like people don't even really call me Angel. Some people just call me like, hey Z. And I'm like, hey, like, but I think it's inherent to me at this point. But that's just my non-binary discovery journey.
I love that. And thank you all for being so open and honest. And, there's something that a lot of you spoke about that I really want to talk about. And it's coming out multiple times. So anyone can kind of jump in and answer this. But how was that? How was having to come out multiple times? And, how does that, feel on your psyche and on, always feeling like you have to constantly explain, constantly teach, how do you navigate that? And anyone can jump in and answer that.
Well, for me personally, I like to think of, I think first off, you kind of have to know the individual that you're dealing with, because I do believe there are some individuals that do want to be educated. And I've had people come to me and ask me questions about like, what is non-binary? Like, what does it mean to be non-binary? And the biggest thing I have to explain to people, because people always think of this androgynous look, and honestly, non-binary individuals do not owe you androgyny. I feel like a lot of people think, oh, I have to be non-binary. I have to, have a face full of facial hair and do like, not every non-binary person identifies that way, which is why, once again, you align under your non-binariness. But it's honestly just knowing the people that you're talking to, because the people want to be educated and they're actually willing to sit down and take the time and do it in a way that you don't feel stigmatized or judged, because there are people that do, ask these questions, but I can kind of tell in the tone of their voice, like, okay, like you're not doing this from a place of understanding or comprehension. You're doing it to kind of like poke fun or, make fun. But that's pretty much what it is. Educate those that want to be educated, and the ones that don't, it's one of those I've kind of learned. It's not what you call me, it's what I respond to. And that's just kind of been how I deal with people. in general, because you can call me anything, but if I respond to it now, I have given you power to mean that I acknowledge what you have now said to me and about me. So that's just me.
That's so powerful. It's about what you respond to, because, you know, anyone in the LGBTQ community, there's so many profanities that people use towards us. And it's one thing to be called it and keep walking, because clearly they weren't talking to me. You know what I mean? Is one way to handle it. And then it's one way to have someone call you something and you turn around and you give that reaction. Now, I know everybody's different, but I always took that mindset as well, that that's not me. So I know you must be talking about somebody else. So, you know, I'm going to keep on moving. And it's so true about that. And knowing your audience, you know, nowadays, I will say, especially with the political climate changing, I'm hoping that people are more open and people are more interested in being educated, because all of us had to be educated at one point. It's not like we were born with this knowledge. It's not like we were born even in our identities. Just like some of you said, you went online, you found community. We had to educate ourselves on who we were. So I'm just hoping in the future that people are, you know, just more open, you know, and just accepting of all people, because at the end of the day, we all bleed red. Does anyone else have any thoughts on how it is to kind of have to come out multiple times and explain themselves?
I mean, I do have a lot of thoughts about this, specifically because of the points that, you know, Angel brought up. Kind of first talking about the question before I get into the points that Angel said that really resonated with me. It's also a matter of kind of like how much education you're going to have to do for a person, even if they're receptive to it. Because there are some people where you're starting at the building blocks of like, all right, guys, like the gender binary, like male, female, we're not doing that. Like that's not happening here. And there are other people who have that down pat. I mean, and this is kind of regardless. Like, obviously, I find there are more cis people who don't quite understand, like, the whole binary is arbitrary. At least I feel that way. But you know, there are people even in the community who aren't non-binary who like don't understand that too. And it's a point of like, if I have to start all the way back there, like, do I have the time? Do I have the energy? And are you going to be receptive to me, like, really sitting down and taking you from like point A all the way to some sort of understanding? And I mean, it's also hard because all non-binary experiences, which I'm sure like people can kind of tell even just through like our 4 experiences as we've already began to like talk to them about them, are different.
Right.
I mean, and that's another big thing too. And the point the point that Angel touched on that I wanted to swing back to is the whole like non-binary people don't owe you androgyny. Because that has been probably one of the highlights, and by highlights I don't mean that as a good thing, of my struggle with coming out and kind of like with being perceived in general, really. Because lots of people, when if they know what like non-binary is, lots of people do think it's like that very androgynous, ethereal, and I mean often white person. And I am very much not that, for a lot of reasons. The fact that I've been able to kind of stop associating clothes with gender so much, which has been a very long process. The fact that for health reasons, I can't bind. I mean, there's a lot of reasons that I've chosen to still present as femme, and I am AFAB. I am assigned female at birth. And there are people that, whether they're educated or they're not, can't seem to like wrap their head around that, or who just kind of refuse to. And they're like, well, why wouldn't you look different from before? Like, you know, you changed your name, you changed your pronouns. Like, why wouldn't you change the way you look. And it's like, because again, there's not one stable, perfect way to be non-binary, and I don't owe you that. The only thing, I just owe it to myself I finally gotten to the point after so many years of trying to deconstruct like the association of closeless gender, which is something I do struggle with often. Mm-hmm. Like, it's taken me so long to finally get to the point that I can be like, okay, because of my health issues and whatever, it is easier for me to wear a dress today. So I don't have to spend the energy on trying to like get into other clothes, quite frankly. And I know like I will still be perceived as AFAB when I go out in public and things, but like, it's like when you educate people or when you correct them and you're like, hey, no, that's not me, this is me, even if it's just like, hey, could you not use she her pronouns for me. Mm-hmm. There are some people who can't seem to get over that hump of, what do you mean? Like, you're not my ideal non-binary, and therefore how can I accept that?
It's true. It's the points that both of you hit on are so important. It's society's fascination with the visual aspect of things, what you look like. So if I see something, this must be what it is, versus asking somebody. And in conversation all the time, I think it's interesting when you're educating people and you're like, it's okay to ask pronouns, and they're like, oh, I don't want to be offensive. I'm like, no, if anything, I'm excited that you asked me my pronouns. That means that you understand that things aren't always what they seem, or I may not identify with the way that I look per se. So I think that's so important to talk about, because in being non-binary, I can imagine the education that you all have to do, the constant explaining. It's, for me being trans, I feel the same way to a certain extent, because they're like, then it becomes a fascination with, what did you get done? What did you look like before? What was your dead name? All of these things. And it's just like, why is there an obsession with that? This is me. Hello, I'm Nicole, and let's move on. So I completely understand where you all are coming from. I want to ask, and anybody can kind of jump on this, how is being non-binary, for individuals that are watching who may not be aware, how is being non-binary different than being transgender? And I know there's some intersectionality sometimes, and sometimes there's not. It just kind of depends on the individual. So anyone can kind of take that question.
I want to hop in for a sec, because I have this like phrase jumping in my head that does not connect to that question per se, but like, I just want to say it and then I'll talk about that. Mm-hmm. And it's just that like, my existence is not an educational experience for anyone but me.
Right.
Like, I learn from myself every day, and if anyone else learns from me, that's cool. Of course, like, I'm a Sagittarius, I love teaching, but I'm not going to teach someone my identity, or like they can go read so many books or like Instagram pages, or I don't know, just do some reading, watch a video. I feel really strongly about that. The non-binary transgender thing, it just depends on like the definitions we're using, and those are still shifting a lot. Right. In my head, I like conceptualize it a lot as transgender as like an umbrella term. Right. That just means like not identifying with the gender assigned at birth. Right. And then like non-binary fits under that very comfortably, right? Some people do not understand that way, and that's just because the definition is evolving and has evolved, and it's happening fast. Like, but what some people, and like this has a lot to do with like you were saying, Mars, about like gender binaries, is like, some people do not understand that there's another option. Like, they're like either or. I love those memes of like the two genders are, and then it's like something random. I think it's funny, but that's another thing. The non-binary is like, I'm not picking either of those, and it could be any of these. And I think sometimes people don't like that, because like we've created this whole system of distributing work, distributing roles based on gender. And if I'm not either of those, then what's my role in your society? Yeah.
No, thank you for that. It's so true. It's like, it kind of all goes back to the social construct of, you know, man, woman, God, if it's anything in between, or if you're trans or anything like that, this doesn't fit. What do we do? People hate change. It's old. It's an old mindset of thinking. You know what I mean? The world is evolving, times are evolving, and people kind of have to get with it. You know what I mean? And I completely agree. Does anyone else, you know, want to chime in on how is non-binary different than being transgender, or or speaking to the intersectionalities of them?
Well, I'm assuming that's directed towards me because, you know, I've recently crossed into that intersection of trans non-binary. So for those of you watching at home, I've been on hormones for about 2 months now. That was a decision that I decided to go and undergo for, you know, my own personal. But even with that decision, it was more so relating to my non-binary experience because like Mara said earlier, with the whole not being able to bind, like being a person that is non-binary, there's certain things that I can't wear and certain ways I can't present. And for me, it was more so like, everybody keeps telling me my skin is clear. Like I never really, like the female development was kind of one of those, I'll take it because it's a part of the package deal with dealing with hormones. You don't get to pick and choose like, oh, I want clear skin, you know, but I don't want this. I was just kind of, but for me, I just like being able to express myself in a way where like, some days I wake up, like I love Jordan sneakers. That's me. Also, some days I wake up, if I want to put on, you know, a 6-inch stiletto, I can do that as well.
Right.
That was like my reason for, once again, going into the intersection of being non-binary, but also hormonally transitioning. Because I still don't look at it as the actual, like, I personally call myself, I tell people this is like my word. I'm a transit. Like some people find it disrespectful, but I use it because I feel like I'm in transition. Like I don't have an end goal. And for me, I feel like people that are transgender, you have an end goal of, you know, whatever that may look like for you, of assimilating into the body that you feel like you were born into. I just feel like my body is becoming very outwardly expressive of how I feel on the inside. So
yeah,
I'm going to speak to the intersection of it.
No, that's the beauty of it. And I'm glad that you were able to bring light to that, because it's true. It's about, life is about the pursuit of happiness and being happy for every individual is different. And I love that you were able to speak to the fact that it's that intersectionality, that you still identify as non-binary, but there's some of the femme parts that you like, and there's some of the non-binary parts that you like. And that's just the beauty of life. So thank you for being open and honest about that. Haiwen, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, actually, I think that in my experience, the only times when I've noticed like a distinction between like non-binary and trans is like actually within the queer community. Like when I'm engaging with like cis people, it's just like, you know, you're all trans. Like I don't really feel a difference, but within trans spaces specifically, I feel like there's just a much bigger representation of like binary trans people and like trans men, trans women. So even in those spaces, like sometimes I feel like in addition to like not knowing where I fit in with like cis people, I also don't know where I fit in within trans communities. So like, I don't know, like support groups or like pages, like online, like Facebook groups or like whatever, or even the first time I like joined a house, the first time I went to a ball, I was just like, I'm just not sure like where I fit in, because a lot of these queer spaces are like catering to kind of binary trans people. And so I feel like that's the difference for me.
I think that is an amazing point, because I often say, from like the cis heterosexual community, we demand to be accepted and respected, but then in our own community, we like put ourselves in a box sometimes, and you're not trans enough, you're not non-binary enough, you're not gay enough, or whatever the case may be. And that always like irks me personally, because I'm like, the enough part is not for me to determine. Whatever and however you decide to present and live your life, I'm going to accept you for you, you know? So I've heard it a lot of times, you're not trans unless you do this, this, and this. And that is like the worst to me, because when I was in the beginning of my transition, it was very that I was told, oh, you're not trans until you go and have, you know, a breast augmentation. You're not trans until you've done this. And I'm like, what? Who are you to tell me, you know, if I'm trans? And I can imagine that as for you all being non-binary, going into these queer spaces where it's like, that whole I'm enough thing. And I hope that as a community, we can eliminate that as we move on into the future, because we're supposed to just be receiving each other with open arms versus saying, you can't sit here until you've done this, this, and this. I think that's the most divisive thing that we can do as a community. And I know that has its own roots, and that's a whole nother conversation, but thank you for bringing light to that. I want to kind of on that same note, but switching a little bit, and anyone can kind of jump in on this. What obstacles have you found in your identity and being non-binary? And that could be anything. That could be whether your family, your friends, your job, kind of, you know, accepting yourself. You know, what are some obstacles that you've kind of found in your journey?
So, I'm gonna hop in here, and it's gonna kind of start with looking at the last question and what I once said, because I tend to find that these questions keep flowing over into each other, which is really nice actually. But one of the big obstacles I have found is the whole not really knowing where you fit in like trans spaces, cis spaces, kind of like just queer spaces in general. And kind of trying to untrain your brain, because there are people kind of like on all sides of the equations, like you were saying, that will say like not enough X, Y, or Z. And that does get like internalized sometimes. And sometimes, you know, it ends up also being a problem. I've worked jobs where people have come in and said, hey, like, I want to talk to a trans person, and I'm the only not cis person on the staff. So I end up having to go, you know, talk to them. And sometimes they want to know something very specific about like hormones or things, which are things that like I've kind of looked into. I've decided hormones aren't for me. Probably top surgery is, but we'll get there, so I can talk to them a little about that. But they either like want to know like specifically about something that I can't speak to, or sometimes like they're there to pretend that they want to know things, and then they just end up being a transphobe. And you know, that's cool too. That's definitely come up where people like in jobs I've had will be like, hey, you know, this is a question that's really sensitive. I really want to talk to like a trans person. And again, because I'm the only person on this staff, it's like, okay, go talk to them. And then it ends up being a transphobe. So, you know, I mean, that's a big danger and obstacle too, kind of bringing it back to the question is, you know, I'm now working a job where it's not a job where like I'm like in like a queer space where people are going to be asking like, you know, what like, you know, I want to talk to a trans person specifically. I'm an essential worker again. But in that space, you know, like I have my little they them pin. And you know, I have coworkers who either really try and then they start doing that, oh my god, I'm so sorry, like I'm really really good about this usually. And it's like you don't need to go into theatrics about like how sorry you are or how good of an ally you usually are, because like even if it's someone like that I really like as a coworker or a person, it's really uncomfortable because like at some point it feels like however unintentionally, it's not about the point of, hey, this is my pronoun, do not use another pronoun for me, becomes their guilt.
Right.
And like you kind of are left like, okay, but did you get the point? And then sometimes, you know, there are people who, and I know for some of them it's not even intentional, but it's like to my face they will use they them pronouns, and then when they're not, it's she her, like, and it's like, I know most of the time they're not doing it to be malicious. They just forget, because I know that my coworkers are generally good intentioned people, but it's kind of exhausting. And I mean, that's putting aside like kind of other ways of, being perceived. Like, we live in the South. Lots of people like saying like, ma'am. And every single time I get called ma'am, I want to like scream into the void. And that is, it's the best way to put it. And that's, it's weird because like, I have a lot of other obstacles. Like, I came out to my professors a year later than I did my friends, because I was afraid that being non-binary wouldn't be viewed as professional in the academic community, and that my name would be viewed as unprofessional. I mean, the point is, there have been so many other obstacles that I faced and that I could go on about for ages, but for some reason, being called ma'am is really, really a thorn in my side, because it's so common and it makes me so dysphoric. And I'm like, should I just dress like androgynous so you can't tell like if you should call me sir or ma'am? Like, will this make this better? What can I do?
Absolutely. No, and I thank you so much for sharing that and being so candid. It's true. No, you shouldn't change yourself for other people. You always want to stand true to you, and you always want to live authentically to you. And society will adjust. But I can understand and I can empathize with the fact that being called ma'am, having coworkers, even though you wear your pin, you're in an inclusive space, coworkers, not understanding, going behind your back and using incorrect pronouns, and that coming back to you. I can understand how that kind of just creates this amount of frustration, like you said, wanting to scream into the void. I think I have those moments like every day. That was an amazing analogy, and I love that. So thank you for sharing. Does anyone else want to talk about any obstacles that they found?
I'll go ahead. I guess hold on. Oh, you want to drop in back there?
You can start.
I will say probably in this moment, my biggest obstacle is, well, once again, just giving you guys background. I work for an organization known as the Bros and Combo Initiative, which primarily deals with, MSM of color. However, I also have strong ties to a trans-led organization, Divas in Dialogue. And with me being at that intersection, the conversation is now steering towards, which way am I going? Will I remain with Bros and Combo? Will I become a diva? And I'm just kind of like, I do work behind both of those organizations. I shouldn't have to pick.
Right.
And that's why I said, like, just going to back to what Hawaiian said earlier, sometimes I feel like LGBTQ people were our own worst enemies, because it gets frustrating at times, because it's very much, I find myself having to question how I show up in the universe. Like, if I want to do something, like, okay, if I want to wear nails or something today, it's like, oh, I'm trans today. But like, okay, if I want to like braid my hair down and put on oversized clothes, it's like, oh, I'm masculine presenting today. And it's just like, can I just exist and just be okay with simply existing?
Absolutely.
But I think that's probably the biggest obstacle in my life at this current point in time.
Yeah, it's that unintentional thing where people are trying to push you into a box. And you're just like, listen, I can coexist. You know what I mean?
And that's my whole thing. Like, I'm good with everybody,
Right.
I'll be an ambassador over here. I can go over here. I can ebb and flow as need be. Absolutely. But it's just like one of those, oh, you gotta pick. And I'm like, that's kind of the fun of being non-binary. I don't want to pick. That's the point.
No, absolutely. Did you want to add something to that, Becca?
Yeah, it was actually like really similar, because like I was gonna say something about how a lot of times when I enter a space, I have to pick which identity I'm bringing. Because sometimes I'll walk in a space, I'm like, like for example, like a Latinx space, I'm like, oh my God, like I can talk in Spanish, like I can talk about foods and they'll know what food I'm talking about. I can make the jokes, like whatever that brings for me, and like I can bring that in. But I may have to leave aside my gender identity. And if I enter a gender identity space, I may have to leave aside that, or I may have to leave aside my like neuroatypical brain, or some of the traumas that I've experienced, and like divorce that from my identity, whatever it may be. It's like having to pick and choose and like cater, and to what people want. And it's like kind of like a survival thing, you know, not even gonna lie. Like, there's certain things that I will either take in or leave behind when I enter spaces. And like, depending on how that space affects me, like my agency is how long I am in that space to the point I can decide. Like, for example, like, I maintain relationships with, for instance, my family, who like knows how to make all my favorite food, and like, you know, we can talk back to how I was when I was 5, and like that's really special to me.
Right.
But I have to limit that because I can only be someone's daughter or granddaughter for so long, right? And then similarly, like I also want to bring in this piece about the workplace that Mara started talking about. I have like a little bit of a different relationship to it, which is, for the most part, I do not choose to come out at work unless someone literally asks me my pronouns. Like, first thing, I do not choose to come out at work. And I think that speaks to like the power imbalance, right? Like, I need to pay rent, I need to buy groceries, so I'm not going to tell you my pronouns, right? Like, unless you ask them, because I'm not risking this. And like, I think that's really important. And like, even though in some ways my choices become limited in that context, I also feel a sense of agency in deciding not to come out, and in, you know, and in deciding only to come out in certain conditions. And I think there's some grief I hold around that I have not processed because I don't know how to yet.
Of course.
I don't know how to yet, and that's definitely an obstacle too.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, I think everybody's situation is unique. Everybody's situation is different, and that is a survival tactic. There is many people who choose not to come out in the workplace for the simple fact that they have that same mindset of, I'm just here to work and I'm going to do my thing and I'm going to leave. I know the trans and non-binary folks who go to work and really don't say anything to anybody for that reason as well. They don't even really talk to their coworkers. It's just kind of like a hi and bye and all job related basis, just because of some of the experiences that they went through, that when someone found out about their identity, it was a whole thing and people were talking about it and it made them so uncomfortable that they left. So I completely understand, and thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Becca. Like I reached a point where like I don't even come out to people. I don't tell people like my pronouns, like unless you know me personally. Like I don't care about what you think of me because you don't know me and I don't know you. Like if it's, especially if it's at work, like I don't want it to be a whole thing. Like I don't want to have that conversation at work. Like it's exhausting. But when it comes to like obstacles, I think that was the question before, right?
Yeah.
Like I think that it's extra hard because we got to deal with the like regular trans obstacles, and it's like, damn, now we got to deal with like non-binary trans obstacles as well. And it's like, it's too much. Like for me, like I think like legal obstacles are a big thing, like for people who are trying to like change their name or change their gender marker or change their IDs, change their license, like whatever. You kind of have like only 2 options, you know. It's that, again, being forced to choose. So even if you're trying to like take steps to, you know, go forward in your transition or whatever, there's only 2 options. And if you don't want to do that, then you're kind of out of luck.
Yeah, and it kind of, I can imagine how that can be defeating, how it can make you, you know, kind of get into your head and think like, you know, at what point am I going to be able to go and change my name and pick from a list of pronouns? I know there's some states who have introduced the X. There's some states that are working on that. And I mean, I hope Florida, we know how Florida is, but I hope Florida eventually can kind of come down the line and be able to be inclusive like some other spaces are.
Can I hop back in for a sec?
Absolutely.
So I did just want to note, not that I thought this was like the whole being out at my job thing. That does actually weirdly resonate with me. Literally, the only reason I'm out at this job is because I happen to, without giving away where I work at a company that promotes inclusiveness and has like a a policy against all of that. And like, I know like that didn't necessarily protect me from transphobic coworkers or anything,
Right.
but I knew that I had at least some sort of protection. I've definitely been at jobs where I've been like, yeah, I use, I use she, her pronouns. I actually, one place that we didn't talk about that I just thought about, where it's like not using your pronouns, not, medically. I'm disabled. I'm chronically ill. So I spend a lot of time in and out of different doctor's offices. I have to see so many specialists. I'm very sick of the inside of doctor's offices at this point. That's not the point. The point is, I would never, ever, ever come out to any of my doctors. Like, even if it was like my rheumatologist, I trust him. Actually, we've been working together for a long time. He treats like my fibromyalgia. Like, we have a working relationship and things like that. Like, he doesn't just tell me you're going on this medication, like, and things like that. I would still, I would never come out to him, because especially medically, there tends to be this weird, huge stigma behind those identities that doctors don't seem to be able to get over. Even if on their forms they say you can mark other for gender, which is super duper rare that you can even do that to begin with. I don't want to go in there and basically have them be even with I'm out to my therapist, but even with my psychiatrist, I don't want them to go in there for any of my doctors and them to be like, are you sure, X, Y, and Z isn't because of the trauma associated to your gender or something like that? Because that has happened, where people have made total false equivalencies.
Right.
And I just wanted to highlight that's another place too where I think both trans and non-binary people tend to feel a little trapped when it comes to dealing with medical stuff that isn't, working with inclusive doctors.
That is a wonderful point, Mars. I think that's not talked about enough is competent medical providers, because people have told, I've heard that from friends of mine and coworkers of mine that have been like, doctor thinks I'm trans or I'm non-binary because of what I went through or whatever the case may be. It's like, okay, wait, identity and trauma, while they can intersect, most of the time their identity is from when they were young or whenever they discovered it and they went and explored that on its own. It's not because something happened. And it really offends me when that happens, because it's making the assumption that you're not competent enough to know who you are. It had to be something that happened to you that shifted you, and it's horrible. I really don't like that. And I think it's really diminishes somebody's competency, and the fact that they are living authentically should be enough, and you shouldn't really have to question that. So I completely agree. So I want to shift a bit. All of you on this amazing panel are Transaction Leadership Academy graduates. We're so excited to have you all join us in our academy. So I'm going to just kind of hop around, but I want to hear from everyone. We could start with Highwind. How was that experience being in the Transaction Leadership Academy?
Honestly, it was kind of a lifeline for me this past summer, because I was quarantining, I was living by myself, I had lost my job because of COVID. It was just a really nice space to get together and meet other people who are like me, like-minded people, and I think it introduced me to a level of activism that I hadn't experienced since college. I hadn't been as active, and also it introduced me to other opportunities. I did the lobby days recently because of the Transaction Leadership Academy. So I'm really grateful for that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. Angel?
For me, I think it was life altering in the sense of I kind of already had backgrounds in advocacy, but I think it empowered me to let me know that my voice matters because I was actually able to be in a room with people that were accepting and affirming of who I am, like without restriction or any stipulations. It wasn't, okay, you have to, I was enough in that sense. So I'm grateful for that. And that I feel like was the start of me learning to not advocate for myself the way I advocate for other individuals. And just learning that it's okay sometimes, because I don't know about anybody else on the panel, but sometimes when people, if they misgender you or if they do something to upset you, sometimes we just kind of sweep it under the rug and like, am I overreacting? Am I just thinking too deep into it? But now it's at the point where, okay, if somebody does something to me that I don't like in reference to how I see myself in the universe, it's not done in a loud or an abrasive manner, but politely pull you to the side, like, hey, you did X, Y, Z.
Right.
I didn't appreciate it. And it's one of those, if you receive it in love and understanding, cool. If you feel some type of way, but I feel better, at least knowing that I don't have that baggage within my spirit, carrying that around. Because one thing I've learned with individuals is sometimes if you don't correct people, they will continually do it.
Right.
And then it's one of those situations where, okay, one day you do it and then I explode on you. And then people are like, well, why is Angel on the 11 o'clock news? Because all of this X, Y, Z. So I'm grateful to the Transaction Academy for that.
Oh, awesome. I'm so glad to hear that. Becca?
For me, it was like, it helped me locate my place in the political process because it's like, and I'm sure a lot of people have felt this way for different reasons, but living in Florida and then also like experiencing the 2016 election as like a little queer 17-year-old, like, or however, I think I was 17, 16, whatever it was like, it felt very much like I have no place here. I have no voice here. It doesn't matter what I do. But like being able to organize with other people who had identities that were both similar and different from mine, and seeing like that they know that like what they do matters, and like that action and effort means something, like that was really affirming to me. Because like looking at it, I live in Sarasota. I live in Sarasota, so none of my representatives at the state level would ask me my pronouns. None of my representatives in the county commission, maybe one in the city commission, maybe, I don't even know, would ask me my pronouns or would really like look at me as a full person. So it just felt really meaningful to work with people in that way and find my place in that process.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that. How about you, Mars?
So I actually ended up kind of stumbling into the Transaction Leadership Academy, like obviously, like, stumbling, or maybe rather stumbling into advocacy in general more broadly, because my professor and my thesis sponsor, when I was in my 4th year of college, suggested, hey, maybe you should try doing some advocacy work before you go to grad school. Because she knew I was going to take a gap year. I'm actually taking 2 now because the world is a mess with the global pandemic. And I'm so glad she suggested it, because at the same time I was in the Transaction Academy, I was also actually interning as a member of the field staff with Equality Florida. So I kind of got to see like what was kind of the wheels that were going on behind the curtain with advocacy, but also in the Transaction Leadership Group. Not only did we get to do some of that advocacy group, that hands-on stuff that I was doing as an intern as well, like, making calls, doing things like that, but also the Leadership Academy presented that very unique opportunity to be able to talk to representatives, especially a lot of local ones, and know that they might not be my representative exactly, but they are a representative in this state. Like, there are people advocating for me in this state. And on a very personal level, So COVID hit, and we had to move out of our dorms March of my last year of college. I was finishing up my thesis. I was, getting prepared to graduate, and everything changed. I moved from New College, which is they call it the New College bubble. It's a very liberal, very queer space in the middle of Sarasota. To back home, to Volusia County, which votes red in everything. Yay. And while my family is relatively, supportive of me, they don't quite get it. So I was kind of floating on a raft without anything, especially after I graduated. Like my thesis focused on queer and historical interpretation of literature, and that felt like my last connection to the LGBTQ community, looking at queer things. And then I felt like I was kind of like on a boat that was slowly filling up with water, having no like lifeline of other like not cis, not straight people to talk to. And the Transaction Academy provided me that space again. And with kind of the fallout that the world was going through, and also the whiplash of having graduated and having defended my thesis, literally sitting on my bed in a Zoom call, which I never expected to do, was kind of wild. I was really disoriented, and it was a very, very grounding place.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. And we're so happy that you all participated. It was beautiful to watch you all blossom in your advocacy, and to see where you're going now is just absolutely incredible. So we thank you all so much for joining us for that. I have one last question because we're coming up on the end of our time together, and I can have like maybe one or two of you answer this, but it's a question from the comments. And it says, I wanted to ask the panel how they feel about the laws being passed, the targeted laws against trans youth in sports, being non-binary. So does anyone want to kind of talk about how they feel about these horrific bills that are being introduced and voted on?
Bitch, we'll start our own sports teams. That's it. Non-binary all-stars. Let's go. I don't care. I always like gravitated towards like non-gendered sports anyway. So
right.
I'm like, you know what? Let's just carve out our own niche. We'll make it work. Somebody else can go.
Me personally, I think the most horrendous things about these laws and these bills, because I'm from Brevard County originally, and they recently just actually had a school board meeting on this very topic. One thing that I'm noticing is people are making decisions for individuals that aren't even present in the room. Like nobody is listening to these trans non-binary youth, because they're looking at it from an adult standpoint, and to try to project adult like values and things onto children is horrific. Right. Because if you honestly think about it, most of these individuals, especially when they're that young, whether they decide to get on blockers or not, they have not fully hit puberty as adults. So when you're trying to talk about and discuss the whole, inherent strength differences, I'm like, this really doesn't even apply at this level.
Correct.
So that's why I'm just kind of like, okay, I'm just going to let you guys... it's Florida. We also know Florida. We get it wrong a lot. I'm really, 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 really hoping that they get this right. Because once again, they've had this discussion, and for some reason, this keeps being a reintroduced topic every, 3 to 5 years. But I also think what it's honestly going to take is we're going to have to get younger people in politics in office. Honestly, because a lot of the people that are holding office typically are older people, and they're using, education that they have. And one thing that I've learned with dealing with older people all the time, they're not really willing to modify their viewpoints and actually learn about new and, necessary topics. So
it's true.
For those of you guys that are watching, go out and vote. Hopefully we can.
No, absolutely, and I thank you so much for that, and it's so true. And if you all look in the comments, if you're watching, look in the comments. As I'm sorry. Oh no, you're fine.
No.
We have these trans sports bills that are being presented and voted on. As we've just talked about, they are horrific, they are uncalled for, and we have 2 action items that folks can take to help stop these bills. So first and foremost, you can email the members in the Senate Health Policy Committee and the Florida leadership and tell them to vote no on the trans sports ban bill. And then the second thing that individuals can do is join our virtual days of action starting this Wednesday, March 31st. We'll be calling legislators and asking them to denounce the anti-trans bills. So if you want more information on that, the links have been posted in the comments. Please, please, please. The last thing that we need is something taken away from our youth. You know, this reminds me of like the trans military bill and all of that. And it's just very, very triggering. And as a community and as a whole, we understand that kids just want to play sports. It's not anything, it's not hurting anybody. So please, once again, the links are in the comments. You can email the members of the Senate Health Policy Committee and the Florida leadership. And please join our virtual days of action starting this Wednesday when we call legislators. So I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart for joining us today. Thank you, Mars, Highwind, Becca, and Angel for being amazing advocates in our community. Thank you for being so open, so honest, and sharing your truth. And thank you all for watching today. I hope you have an amazing evening. And once again, links are in the chat. We got to fight against this. We have to make sure they vote no. So you all have an amazing day, okay? Thank you so much.